From advertising to software as a service to data.
Across all of our programs and clients, we've seen a 55 to 65% open rate.
Getting brands authentically integrated into content performs better than TV advertising.
Typical lifespan of an article is about 24 to 36 hours.
If we're reaching out to the right person with the right message and a clear call to action, then it's just a matter of timing.
Welcome to the MarTech Podcast, a member of the I Hear Everything Podcast Network. In this podcast, you'll hear the stories of world-class marketers that use technology to drive business results and achieve career success. Here's the host of the MarTech Podcast, Benjamin Shapiro.
Welcome to the MarTech Podcast. I'm Benjamin Shapiro, the executive producer of the MarTech Podcast, and today we've got a special episode for you, which is going to be guest hosted by Juan Mendoza, the author of the MarTech Weekly Newsletter. Juan is a recovering MarTech consultant turned creator who writes an amazing weekly newsletter about the MarTech industry. And I'm thrilled to invite him and some of his friends to take the mic and share their knowledge with you, our loyal MarTech Podcast listeners. All right, here's a special episode of the MarTech Podcast, guest hosted by Juan Mendoza, the author of the MarTech Weekly Newsletter.
Hello, and welcome back, MarTechers. My name is Juan Mendoza from the MarTech Weekly Newsletter. Today, we're going to discuss the evolution of social media, advertising, and marketing data. Joining me today is Manu Matthew. He is the CEO of Cohora. The mission of Cohora is to empower brands to redefine and nurture their relationships with customers, fostering a collaborative dialogue through brand-owned social communities. And so today, Manu and I are going to deep dive into why social media and advertising need to evolve. Okay, so here's my conversation with Manu Matthew, the CEO of Cohora. Manu, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm great, Juan. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Great. So can you give us the elevator pitch for Cohora? What is it all about?
Absolutely. So Cohora is a customer activation and engagement platform. We help brands create a unique relationship with their customers. Essentially, what our solution does is we're the only platform that enables brands to activate and convert an otherwise dormant customer base into loyalists and advocates of the brand that measurably drives top-line revenue growth and hopefully lifts brand advocacy.
I love it. That was definitely a quick elevator ride, so thank you. Now, I want to get into this topic of social media and advertising and why both need to evolve and how they kind of come together. So can you open us up a little bit and tell us more about how has consumer behavior and expectations changed in the recent years? What have you seen in the market? Why is it important for these two aspects of marketing, social media and advertising, to evolve and meet those expectations?
Obviously, social media is a very powerful tool and platform for raising brand awareness for products or services. And you have this notion of influencers that also help to promote this. It's a very successful way for many brands to ultimately get the message out there. The problem, I think, has been if you're an ROI-based marketer who isn't, ultimately, how do you prove the return on investment for working with an influencer? It's tough. So I think we're getting into this age where you are bombarded with advertising, sponsored content. So for the consumer, sort of deciphering between what is sponsored content versus authentic content can be fairly daunting, right? And I think advertising in the traditional sense that is relied also on third-party cookies is going to go through a bit of a transformation there. But our position is the third-party social networks have actually taught us quite a bit about the consumer and how they want to engage with content, when they want to engage with it, and on what platform. So I think there's an opportunity for brands to embrace that level of learning, but tap into an opportunity where they are able to capitalize on the conversations, able to capitalize on the content that's showing up here on these social networks to ultimately help them drive a much more meaningful conversation with their consumer.
So do you think that the level of personalization, the expectations that consumers have around personalized experiences, things that are tailored to them, has gone up in recent years, or has it largely remained the same?
I think it's gone up, actually. Consumers are willing to share a lot more data about themselves with the brand that they're interested in working with a certain sort of reward structure in place, perhaps. But I think the reason that is happening is because they want a more personalized sort of relationship with the brand. I think the flip side of that, though, is I don't know if brands are quite ready to capitalize on it, because we are talking about a lot of data. We're talking about data that comes in the form of what we call zero-party data, enhanced first-party data, and then obviously the authentic content that joins that. Those three pieces together essentially is a mountain of information and data that describes a given segment or a customer. So the brands, while the intention is there, I'm not sure a lot of them are quite ready to capitalize on it.
I agree. I think that there's a kind of a countervailing force here, which is that you mentioned this actually earlier, was the third-party cookies are going away. Brands are increasingly being told by technology platforms to collect more first-party data. And then you have marketers in the middle saying, well, yeah, for us to collect more data and zero-party actual explicitly given data from customers, we need to give them something in return. And so I think the second order effect of all of this is that a lot of personalization programs in brands have just ramped up. They're using more technology to use that. They're using more platforms to actually manage that, but also they're thinking strategically about, well, if customers are going to give us all their preference data and tell us more about them, then we need to serve them in some way or enhance the product in some way in order to meet that request.
I think it's the age-old issue where while the different technology stacks have been evolving to help brands collect this data, it's been an interesting challenge for the brands because they've taken what we like to call a brand-centric approach to solving the problem, which ultimately leads to different technology solutions being stitched together to solve for that problem, right? So then what happens? You have a very complicated technology stack. And when you have a complicated technology stack, it leads to sometimes a lot of data leakage or latency in data collection or latency in actionability, which is kind of a weird evolution. So you had all these technologies that were created and put in place to collect information. And then CDPs came around and said, well, you need a CDP to now synchronize all that data to help you understand who your customer is. And I've met a whole bunch of brands over the last year who aren't getting the value that they want out of a CDP or their CRM platform. And I think the reason is because of that very same fact. You've essentially created a fairly fragmented stack to solve for some of this stuff. So it's very hard to fix. It's very hard to pull something out and put something else in. So our take is, well, there's actually a very simple approach to this. You can actually approach this from a customer-centric perspective where you have the capability to collect those three data sets quite easily, in fact, zero party, enhanced first party, and then encourage the customer to be part of propagating the product that you're selling. So through content that they produce and then share. So I think customers are willing to do that if they believe in what the brand is doing, or they believe in the product, or they love the product. So I was just reading this article on the Wall Street Journal yesterday about Elon Musk and the sort of whole viral component that he built into how he goes to market with Tesla, right? And essentially, if you look at the growth of Tesla, is largely driven through really his fan base and the Tesla fan base, where they were promoting and creating content about the Tesla vehicle because they loved the car, they loved what it stood for, they loved the software. And they created an entire program around how to incentivize customers to do exactly that, from attending car shows to getting $1,000 off of their vehicles. A whole bunch of interesting schemes. I thought it was a fascinating article. But what we've essentially said is, well, there's no reason why other brands cannot adopt a platform or turnkey platform similar to that, where you're able to capture the data, utilize the data, compensate your customers appropriately for it, and make them a significant part of your strategic plan and growth as you get bigger.
It's interesting. There's all of these examples around personalization not working, or being something that brands have overinvested in, where perhaps the tactic wasn't right, it didn't ladder up into commercial value. But then again, what we're here to talk about today is the power of advertising and social media as that combination. And yes, a lot of marketers use social media for advertising, but they also use it organically as well. But there is a lot of aspects of this where, particularly in B2B, you see a lot of personalization happening from social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter, where you can actually enrich customer profiles and serve them relevant content based on their entire work history. As just one small example there, where you see so much personalization happening, where a lot of these social platforms expose so much data about their customers, and you can really do a lot there with that. But I'd love for you to talk us through some examples. We know that at Kahora, you're ramping up, you're scaling up. It's incredible to see. And I would like to sort of understand how your customers are actually addressing both social media and advertising in some of their successful case studies?
So I think part of the challenge on third-party social sites is as a brand, you're competing with other brands to get the attention, this very small attention window for a consumer and the shortened scrolling time that's happening nowadays. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the long run. But an example would be in the cosmetic space or in the food space, we essentially take transactional data from our customers, we load it into what we call a brand-owned community network. And what that ends up doing is I then have the ability to have a dialogue or conversation with other customers that have purchased a similar product or some other products from the brand. Just to take a quick step back, the genesis of the company, we took a page out of Sephora. I don't know if you're familiar with Sephora's Beauty Insider product. So they launched that back in 2001 with product reviews. And I think at that point, 30,000 people showed up just to complete product reviews on their site. Fast forward today, you have Beauty Insider where at any given point in time, there's probably 1 million people just chatting about products, makeup. There's groups within the chat, how to apply makeup. So what's happening there? Essentially, you have customers of yours that are discussing a given product, telling you how to use it, what they like, what they don't like. And ultimately, that discussion forum is producing a ton of content that is describing your customer, where they are in the journey. And you have other customers that are now becoming advocates for given products and telling you why they love products. And that actually, authentic content drives about 22 times more engagement than influencer content. So Sephora has been able to capitalize that to the tune of today, it attributes for 85% of their revenue on an annualized basis. And so what we've done is taken that same model, created a turnkey platform that allows a brand's customers to essentially have a conversation on a platform about a product, and I can load a video, I can load an image, I can load a clip on how to put the makeup on, let's just say. And all that interaction is ultimately tracked in our platform. And the brand can now have a very, very targeted conversation with the people that are part of that thread because they're able to measure sentiment and also potentially alter the offer incentive that is going out to those individuals. So what is that doing? Well, that means I'm no longer just part of a big segment just because of what I purchased. I'm now part of a dynamic segment based off of behavior, based off of sentiment, based off of the content I shared, based off of the interaction that I had. It's a very, very different way to look at personalization.
I like the example of Sephora. There are some brands that, because of the nature of their business and product, they just do so well with social media, advertising in that combination. But the personalization is also built in to be viral, right? And to be shareable on social. Like the example I go to all the time is the Spotify Wrap that happens at the end of the year. It's personalization, it's a smart use of data, but it's finely tuned to social virality because people love to share what actually they listen to throughout the year. So I reckon there's a 0.5% of marketers in the world that think like that they can join the dots between the customer data you're collecting, the ability to drive reach and awareness and organic virality via social media, and then use that data for advertising and join all those dots together. But I think it's very rare to see those kinds of examples out in market. Often to the point, I would say that a lot of marketers perhaps shouldn't strive for it because a lot of brands are just not built to have that kind of integration across their channels.
Well, I agree, but it goes back to my comment about the brand-centric MarTech stack, right? The complexity has been built over time, but there actually is a fairly straightforward way to solve for that. Just if you think about how you're trying to capture the information. The other part is just going back to your point about the organic growth and referral codes. What we are essentially trying to do with the Quora platform is say, hey, look, a customer is someone that buys from you one time. A loyalist is someone that buys from you a lot of times. So we can help you move the needle in that direction as one step because we're able to measure engagement between those two sort of goalposts. And the next step is to how do you figure out of the loyalists that you have, who is going to be the advocate? Who's going to be willing to pick up the megaphone and scream from the mountaintop about your product and distribute the referral codes and create content for you? because we're not looking to build the next mega influencer. We actually like to think of the fact that in your data, there's all those gold pieces lying around where you have micro influencers that are able to create content that still moves the needle and can do it 2 to 3 times a year. And that's really a lot, because that content can then be shared on my Facebook page, on my Instagram page, and for my own close-knit followers to see. And that leads to traffic on your site. That's an organic way to kind of grow your user base. And if I did that, well, you now have the brand now has the opportunity to kind of share. Instead of taking a greater share of my wallet, you can actually put money in my wallet, right? So you can treat me like a micro affiliate if you wanted. Give me a % of the sale. And those have been very effective ways to drive revenue, as Sephora has shown or as Tesla has shown. The struggle has been, I think brands sit on all the data, they just can't mobilize it. But we are hoping that we can change that.
I think that's a great point, is that not every brand can be that mega mainstream viral superstar with social. However, with their specific community and their niche and the customers they're trying to reach, they can actually do a lot in that space. So that is absolutely fantastic. And I would love to end on this note, which is when marketers are thinking about evolving their strategies around social and advertising, what actionable steps do you recommend for companies that want to try to evolve it and make it better and really serve their customer in better ways through those channels?
I think it comes down to better targeting, better content, and better offers. So if you're not able to identify, first off, who is coming to your site and be able to, at the very least, put them into some sort of a cohort or segment, then basically I'm going to get generic offers from the get-go. But the technology today exists where you can actually collect a little bit more information about the customer and incentivize them to stay a little longer. And then it comes down to content. So content in this scenario is king.
Content is king. And what a wonderful way to wrap up our first episode with the amazing Manu Matthew. He's the CEO at Kohora. Now, join us for tomorrow, where Matthew and I will be diving into first and zero party data in marketing and CX. If you can't wait until our next episode and like to learn more about Manu, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in our show notes. You can also contact him on Twitter, where his handle is @ManuMatthewVIQ, or visit his company website at Kohora.com. Manu, thanks for joining us for today.
Thanks, Juan. I appreciate the opportunity. It was wonderful. Loved it.
Okay, that wraps up this episode of the Martech Podcast. Thanks to our guest host, Juan Mendoza, the author of the Martech Weekly Newsletter. If you'd like to get in touch with Juan, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in our show notes, or you can contact him on Twitter. His handle is Juan Mendoza, but it's spelled crazy pants. It's JU4NMEND0Z4. Or it's a little easier to just visit his company's website, which is themartechweekly.com. Just one more link in our show notes I'd like to tell you about. If you didn't have a chance to take notes while you were listening to this podcast, head over to martechpod.com, where we have summaries of all of our episodes and contact information for our guests. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletters, and you can even send us your topic suggestions or your marketing questions, which we'll answer live on our show. Of course, you can always reach out on social media. Our handle is MartechPod, MarTechPod, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or you can contact me directly. My handle is Ben J. Shap, BenJShap. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you want a daily stream of marketing and technology knowledge in your podcast feed, we're going to publish an episode every day this year. So hit the subscribe button in your podcast app, and we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. All right, that's it for today. But until next time, my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.